Alright everybody, welcome back to another Imperium magazine review. Today we're taking a look at issues 14 and 15. Unfortunately, my issue 14 came with some scuff marks on the cover, but since these are the breakaway covers, it's not too much of an issue. That's fine, I can live with it. All the contents inside are there. And then for that issue, we have this whole load of plastic here on this frame included, which I believe is actually a third of the Munitorum armored container, barrels, and crates set, which is nice for scatter terrain. I don't have any scatter terrain like this. I'm returning to the hobby, and back in my time in the hobby almost 20 years ago, I was using mostly homemade terrain, which unfortunately I no longer have. So we're actually going to be taking a look at this sprue a little later because, spoiler warning, I believe there's 3 of these sprues in that Munitorum armored container box, and I believe we'll be getting a few more of these sprues specifically moving forward, so I'll go ahead and show those off when we have all 3 of them, if not more, put together and set up for the terrain. Now when it comes to issue 14, let's go ahead and set this large sprue aside. We go ahead and take a look, and here we've got our armored container filled with valuable cargo. So in the playthrough in this issue, it looks like we're going to be using the armored container as an objective or something like that. And then moving forward, we have a little bit of the background on the Eldari. I'm still used to Eldar and Dark Eldar. I'm not used to Eldari and Drukhari so much just yet, but I guess I just gotta get with the times. And then that little story and information and background of the Eldari continued. Here, stuff about their origins, the webway, different craft worlds. It's a pretty good read, and the Eldar lore hasn't changed that much, at least as far as I'm aware. So I still am pretty familiar with it, especially after reading this. Things are still quite similar to what I'm familiar with, so there's that. And then some quick tips on building the container with rubber bands here to hold it together while it's being glued, and then of course nipper safety and things like that. This is actually a really good little tidbit, and like I've said in previous videos, when it comes to these building or painting guides in the Imperium magazine, some of these little tips that you usually don't see in modern kits any longer, specifically from Games Workshop, it's nice and refreshing to see some of that stuff. And then moving forward, the build guide. Now we have how to paint, and then again, this doesn't have us spray base coating or priming the miniatures or the plastic. I would suggest that, but moving through this how to paint tutorial, it's actually not terrible. It teaches us how to dry brush Mechanica Standard Gray over Chaos Black to get some subtle highlighting and definition of detail on the black on the armored container. So it's actually not a bad paint guide on how to get decent looking terrain without too much effort. And then painting in some details here and there on the crates and the storm bolter itself and things like that. But again, this is terrain, so it doesn't actually have us go too in depth with it, which I'm okay with, because terrain, I'd like it to look decent on the battlefield, but it doesn't have to be something that you spend weeks on painting up and getting it to look incredible. If it's, you know, rubble or terrain or this armored container, it's fine if it gets a little beat up, because it makes it more realistic if it has the paint chips and things like that. As long as, again, this doesn't have us prime it, so if you're moving it around the table and it gets some chips, you'll see chips into the plastic. But if you do prime it and it gets some chips and you don't varnish it, at least it adds to the realism in my mind. And then here we have some rules about terrain, how to use the terrain, how to traverse terrain, what to roll and everything like that, and how to gauge engagement range and things like that, how to measure around it and move within it. Now the playthrough here is pretty cool as well. It's, I believe, just the Necron Warriors and the Assault Intercessors that we got in previous issues, and it looks like the objective is the armored container itself, and you play through that objective to see who gains control of that valuable asset, being the armored container. And then once you play through it all, you go ahead and rematch and switch armies with your opponent back and forth to see which one you like more. I'm not sure how many times people are actually playing through these scenarios and switching the armies after they play, or switching the miniatures, but there's that. And then moving on to issue 15 we have here, and this is a bit more exciting. Here we get our Necron FLAYED ones, and I believe these are an Elite's choice. I believe they were an Elite's choice back in the 2000s when I had that old Necron army from 4th edition. I believe that's carried over, and the FLAYED ones are interesting. Here we can see quite a gruesome image of one of these FLAYED 1 Necrons wearing the corpse of one of his victims and the flayed skin draped over itself. And that's essentially what the FLAYED ones are. Here we have a little bit of background on the cursed flesh eaters. They have the Flayer virus. They were infected with that by a Catan, one of their elder gods that they ended up essentially enslaving and using as Dyson spheres, pretty much. Cursed them with the Flayer virus, and now they're compelled to flay the flesh from their enemies and wear it on themselves. So it's quite fitting for the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, and it's quite gruesome. And here you see the miniatures themselves with their Flayer claws covered in essentially corpses of their recent foes. And if we move forward, we find out about the Imperium Sanctus. I actually had to learn about this myself. This is quite new lore to me, even though it's been around maybe about 5 years or so from what I'm aware. When the Great Rift ripped the Imperium in half, and the Imperium Sanctus is the area that is closest to Terra, I believe, where the Necronomicon shines brightest to guide the ships through the Imperium and all of that. And then we have some information about different solar systems, the Sol system, the Empire of Ultramar, which is several different solar systems, through their segmentum, or whatever it's called on the galactic map. And then Space Marines Chapter Command, the way that this is structured for the 10 companies of Space Marines that follow the Codex Astartes written by Rubute Gilliman himself. And then this is a picture of Marnius Calgar and his honor guard. I believe this was the cover of the 4th edition or 5th edition Space Marines Codex. I believe it was 5th edition. Could be wrong, but that's when I stopped playing. And then how to build. Here we build our FLAYED ones. This, be very careful. These are very thin and spindly. If we take a look at the sprue again, you see this one claw sticking out just right here. These claws here, very thin, very easy to break, so be very careful with them. Use that as caution. Again, clipper and glue safety, just like every issue has that has miniatures. And then it suggests dry fitting everything, which I suggest to dry fit everything as well, as these can be quite fiddly. And then we have our build guide here. Moving on, we have our how to paint. This is not how I'm gonna go ahead and go about painting these FLAYED ones, but this is not a bad beginner tutorial on how to paint them. Again, there is no priming the miniatures, it's just paint straight to plastic. Generally that works. I've done that before in the past when I was a young kid painting my Warhammer miniatures with no primer. You can get away with it, and if you follow this guide, it actually doesn't look too bad, and you layer up. So you do 3 coats of Runelord Brass initially, and that essentially will be the primer, because then you paint over that, so at least the paint has other paint to adhere to. And then if we go along the next few pages, the end result, aside from all the flesh on the miniatures themselves being just plain white, they don't look terrible, and they've got their 3 colors on them. They're ready for the tabletop. Now, this scenario has us play with our Assault Intercessors, split in half in a squad of 3 and 3, or a squad of 6 combat squatted into 3 of 3, I guess. And then the Canoptech Plasma Sight, which is that small guy that came with the Scorpec Destroyers in a previous issue. And it seems as though the assault intercessors need to destroy the plasma site before the Necron flayed ones can stop them. And they essentially deep strike with their dimensional translocation, I believe. I'm not sure if that's actually how deep strike works with dimensional translocation. It looks like they can be deployed from reinforcements, so it does seem like it works similarly to deep strike, or at least as much as I remember of deep strike from the time. So you go ahead and you play your scenario where your Marines try to take over and kill that Canoptech plasma site before the flayed ones flay them out of their armor. And then again, rematch to try it all over again. Moving forward. Now, again, this is much more exciting here. The flayed ones. These flayed ones were originally included in, I believe, a kill team box where they were fighting against, I believe it was heavy intercessors, and this was the only way to get each of those from that kill team box. If you wanted those 5 heavy intercessors or these 5 flayed ones, you had to buy that kill team box or split it with a buddy or something like that. But now I believe you can buy each of them from their own box set themselves. So this one sprue here will be our 5 flayed ones. I'm going to get these snipped out and cleaned up so we can take a look at what the miniatures look like unpainted and get some closer details. But again, I will remind you, these are very thin and fiddly, so be very careful with them. Alright, we'll take a look at that in just a moment. And as I said, the armored containers, I believe we're getting more, so we're going to take a look at those more in depth with the later issues. Alright, we'll be right back. Alright, we're back with our Necron flayed ones here. These are great sculpts. The miniatures themselves look incredibly detailed. Each of the parts look great. They really convey that kind of body horror mutilation that they're supposed to. They flay their enemies and wear their skin. They've got faces and skin stretched across their surfaces on their large shoulder plate armor, things like that. On the sprue, there's also an additional severed arm and hand that you can use to decorate your miniatures as well. I haven't added those to mine as of yet because these will probably end up getting based a little differently and changed up and then maybe added at that time. But again, these sculpts are great. If you're looking to pick up Necron flayed ones and you see this Imperium magazine on the shelf, the value is great. I would say pick it up in a heartbeat because I believe these 5 miniatures sold from Games Workshop is 55 USD directly from their website. You might be able to get it for 50 or 45 even from some discounted resellers, but if you find this in your local store or Hobby Lobby on the shelf and you're interested in flayed ones, pick them up. It's a $14, $15 issue that has these guys in it, so the value is incredible. I will say that these were one of the biggest headaches to put together. I don't want to be putting any more Necron flayed ones together after these. I'm going to paint these up, maybe base them differently as I said, and add them to my growing Necron force from Imperium magazine, but I won't be picking them up again because they are so spindly and fiddly and difficult to put together. The contact points, I would say they could be molded a little better to fit around the hips where you connect the upper thighs to the hips of the body itself. That's a little difficult to get them to stand flat on both of their feet. We have our Citadel plastic glue here that we got with the Imperium collection. If you have this, you can use it with this thin applicator tip with a needle. That'll work fine. If you have a local store or if you'd like to pick this up here, Tamiya Extra Thin Cement, trying to get him in the shot, Tamiya Extra Thin Cement. This is incredibly useful to put these Necron miniatures together because of the brush applicator. There's a little substance off. There's a small little brush applicator tip included here. Get it in frame. It's very small, as you can see right in front of my finger there, this is incredibly useful to put together these guys. You can just squeeze the parts together and brush that extra thin cement into the seams to glue them together. I find it a bit easier to work with than the Citadel plastic glue with the pointed applicator. You're able to control it a bit better, and of course you can always add some extra bits of sprue to this for sprue goots for gap filling and things like that. Get a second bottle and just throw some bits of sprue in there, and then that'll dissolve in there and you can use it to fill gaps. If you're watching my videos, you've probably seen a bunch of other YouTubers using Tamiya extra thin cement and make it into extra thick cement or sprue goo. If you haven't, it's a great tool in the hobby, and it's very helpful to close some of the seam lines on these miniatures. Now, if we go ahead and take a look up close on a few, let's grab this one here, I believe it is. Let's get it in frame. He's got that bit of skin on his arm that goes and reaches around up over his hood. There's a little bit of a seam line there. It's difficult to see. My camera kind of won't focus on it. Right there on the shoulder, that extra thin cement, brushing that over, that seam line will help that disappear and make it look more uniform and less like two different parts. Other than that, be very careful with these guys. As you can see, their little claws are very long and very thin. They're all individual pieces. I believe there's 1 or 2 claws on the arm itself, and the rest of the palm of the hand will have the other 2 or 3 claws on that, and it's another piece that you have to kind of sandwich together to complete the hands. Keep that in mind. That was a little difficult, so take your time with these. If you're young, or if you're just joining Warhammer with Imperium magazine and following along with the collection, be very careful, and again, if you're young, if you're a kid, go ahead and get help from your parents for cutting these out and cleaning them up and gluing them together. Other than that, this is great value. Pick up this issue if you're interested in Necron FLAYED ones. I don't know how competitive they are on the battlefield, but at such a deep discount, if you picked up this issue for $15 compared to the $55 just for a painting project, I would say go for it. They're great. The detail, this one has a stretched face over its shoulder, and then essentially a cloak around back of flesh from behind its arms. That whole kind of body disfigurement, body horror is really showcased really well in these. Games Workshop did a great job with the new sculpts compared to the old metal sculpts from the early 2000s. So I can only sing their praises there, not to be a GW shill, but they're incredibly well looking miniatures, incredibly well designed, and they give off the creepy vibe that they're kind of meant to give. Pick them up. I would suggest them. They're great, and again, the value is there. Again, thanks for watching. I'll have the next few videos out with Imperium magazine. I believe we're getting one of our premium kits soon, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.